Hello, I'm Jenny with Gogh Art Crate. We are an art tutorial and supply store online. We have a subscription box that you can do monthly with 2 projects, and those are random projects that we design. And then you can also just buy the past crates from the subscription, or you can purchase individual kits if there's maybe one particular painting that you like out of the box that you want to buy and you don't want to subscribe, you just want to pick and choose. So that's an option. You can find all of that on gobox.com. And that is spelled just like Van Gogh's name, Gogh.com. And have fun shopping. We have, I don't know, 100 or more different kits to choose from. Definitely, I think we're over 100 now. We've been in business since doing this part since 2019. And we've been teaching in an art studio setting since 2011. So anyway, got that out of the way. Today we are painting this, I call it the Harvest Mountain Board, and it is the coolest thing. So these are handmade in the US by a guy with a little wood shop who I found online and started conversations with because he makes the most beautiful product. And I have one of these that has, I think 4 or 5 mountains. It's huge. It's a very show-stopping wall piece that I haven't painted yet. I've had it for over a year and I just haven't taken the time to sit down and visualize what I want to do because it's very big. And anyway, yeah, they're pretty cool. They have the hanging system on the back, which is why it's not going to sit completely flat when painting. You can use an easel if you want. And this one, we are going to treat this like a wood stain. So every single bit of paint that we add to this is going to be watered down, except for when we get to the point of doing the moon and the trees and of course the stars. But for the background part, if you've ever worked with a wood stain, you will know they're very thin and transparent, and that's what we want to shoot for. So in your kit that you get all the paint colors. They come in these fun little bottles, and then you'll get your coaster, which we use to trace the moon, but you can use, if you want a smaller moon, you could like find a mug like this is a little bit smaller, or some other round object that you want to trace. And then if you can use your own brushes, or you can get our 4-pack is $10. These last forever. They're so great. As long as you wash them when you're done and let them dry and take care of them good, they're going to last you a long time. And I love the sizes, and I happen to love the mix of some flat brushes with a round brush. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to take my biggest brush to start. I have my water cup for washing the brush. A little paper towel or a paint rag works. Dip your brush in the water. I'm going to scoot this out of the way so I can show you how I mix up the watered down paint. We're going to start with the yellow. So I'm going to put a drop of water next to my yellow. And I'm just going to stir a little yellow paint in there. So you want it really watery. And this is going to be where the sun is setting. So just the base of the mountain. And we're going to gradually go up into a yellow-orange, and then finally transferring into blue. So let's go ahead first. I want to add just a tiny dot of orange. So I'm going to use the corner of my brush, pick up just the smallest dot of orange, mix that in. Yeah, I need some more. That didn't do enough. So we're making kind of I would call this like Sunny Delight. Sunny Delight color. Let's see how this works. Now look at my brush. You can see there is hardly anything on here paint-wise. It's a lot of water. So let's see. Brush that on there. I have a bit too much water on here, so I'm going to dab this. And then that can help me absorb some. And I can tell already that I could use a little more paint into that. First, it's a little bit of a guessing game. And you might even need to do more than one coat. So be careful in here. I got a little yellow on the mountain just because I wasn't careful enough. You can get yellow into this because that gets painted white with opaque white later. So you don't have to worry about that. I just try to avoid getting paint on this part because this stays the color of the wood. I just try to make it somewhat even because you wouldn't want it like be really high on one side and low on the other. So this is drying already. The wood is just kind of sucking that water right up. And so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stir a little more paint in of both the yellow and a dot of orange here and there. So I have a little bit more opaque paint. So less water, more paint, just by stirring more paint into your water. Give this a secondary coat. This is probably the hardest part at first to understand how much water to use with paint. And I came up, this is probably right here. If I were to measure here with a ruler, it's probably about 2 inches. And so on each side, about 2 inches. They don't have to be 100% even. I know mine aren't right now. And you know what I'm going to do right now? I'm going to actually do a few little streaks of this yellow up in here, like the sunset's kind of breaking up. Just using the thin edge of the brush here. And those will most likely get mostly covered up by the next color we add. So working quickly, let's go ahead and add a bit more orange to this because we want to fade to where it's fairly orange. I'm going to add a tiny bit more water. I like to start out with it pretty watered down because it's a lot easier to add more opacity than it is to take away the paint if you've made it too opaque. So I'm going to come over here. Now I'm going to start right at the edge where the yellow ends, but now I'm going to brush across and then I'm going to brush down into that yellow just a bit so that they fade together and make kind of a gradient. So gradient is a gradual fade from one color to the other that's very soft and blended. Now I'm going to bring this color right to here. It's nice we have that to work with. It's like, oh, here's my stopping point. You can see I've overlapped on both sides. Please don't worry about that at all. It's going to make your life a lot easier if you just let it happen. Already running out of my color here. Got some water in here. Here, brush down into the yellow just a bit. You can end up covering a lot of your yellow. Very cool so far. So far, so good. I love this color pattern on here, and I think it looks really good. So now we have the difficulty of transferring from orange into blue, and I will tell you why that's difficult. While this is drying, let me show you on my palette. So I'm going to take one of these smaller brushes, and here's the color I get if I mix orange. Try that off. And blue. Well, that's actually not so bad. But if you have more orange in it, it turns, you can see it starts turning kind of brown. And it's not a horrible thing. This is actually a similar color to what we're going to use to paint our trees on later. But for the sky, we want to keep it fairly pure. I know sometimes if you look at the sky, I spend a lot of time looking at the sky, sunsets and whatnot. And I think that's just part of being an artist. And sometimes the clouds are kind of brownish, depending on the lighting. And I mean, the sky can change and be so many different colors that you wouldn't suspect. And as you learn to paint more, you'll start to learn to see more. It's just a habitual thing, I think. And you'll notice these things. Okay, so let's see. What's the best way to do this? Let's take our blue and put a little swatch there, and let's add water. A lot of water. We want to start with this one really, really watered down. And you know, I am going to dot in a little bit of orange just to make it a very small, I want to subdue it just a little bit. A very small amount of subduing. So just go little by little like I am. So you don't want it to turn brown, but you do want it to turn a bit more subdued because it's going to go better with this look. Now, what I want to do is I want to blot my brush so I have hardly any remaining. And I'm going to come across the top here. And just like we did last time, I want to brush down just a bit. Now, this is where you're going to notice that really brown color coming through because we're going right on top of orange. So you can see it there. And that's okay to have a little bit of that because it is going to fade into this really pretty blue at the top here. But you can see I brought it down maybe 1/2 inch or so. And the cool thing here is if you have if your paint's too opaque, you didn't put enough water in it, and you've got a really hard line there, you can wash your brush and dry it off so it's just damp. And use your brush and just kind of smudge the edge where the two colors meet. And that will help them fade together to be more of a pleasant gradient. So let's go ahead and go all the way across here. On this other side, brush across. And then brush down maybe 1/2 inch or so. So you've got this kind of funky greenish brownish swamp color, I guess is what I would call it. Once we get that fade in though, then we can really have fun with the upper part of the sky and make it transition into be a really pretty blue. So yeah, I'm overlapping into the mountain just like I've been doing, just because it's easier to get a nice brush stroke through here if you just let yourself overlap it. So here I've got that where I talked about where I have more of a hard transition line. And I don't think it looks bad, but I know that I can fix it and make it look a little bit better. So I'll wash and dry my brush so it's just slightly damp. And just go over the seam where the two colors meet. And if it's dried too much and you're just not having much luck with that, you can take and remix your orange and yellow color and just come in and bring some more of that color up in here to soften the edges. Same with over here. But I feel like this looks pretty good so far. And I don't want this to dry too much before I run out of space. So most of my color is gone. Gonna make a little more. Make sure you always have that water in there. A little orange to dull it down. It doesn't have to be the exact shade because we are going to have a richer blue as we get up in here. So you can see mine is already a more rich color. So I always brush it across and then start brushing down. And what I'm doing here is I'm allowing my brush to kind of run out of paint right on the surface of this wood. Painting on wood is a fun experience, and some people really love it. Some people love it more than canvas. I am one of those. I like painting on wood, smooth wood, a lot better than painting on canvas. And part of that might be that I've spent so much of my life painting on canvas and I'm like ready for something different. But I also love how fast the paint absorbs. And you're not dealing with, if you're working with smooth wood, you're not dealing with a lot of texture. Like with canvas, you've got that texture on the top, which is called the tooth of the canvas. And if I'm being honest, it can be kind of frustrating sometimes, depending on what you're painting. I guess I just get tired of it. Okay, so here's what I'm doing now. I'm just bringing a little more blue paint into here. I don't have much water in this anymore. I think I could add a little because my brush is dragging a little bit. That's one of the things too. The water will help your brush not to drag too much. And you will have natural things going on in here with the wood that are super cool, like that I didn't notice before until I started putting the blue on here. So wood is naturally, this particular wood, pine, is, I believe that's pine. I'm just trying to go off memory. It's naturally a more of a yellow tone. So when you're painting the blue over it, some of the stuff pops through that you didn't notice before, like here and here. I've got these, they're almost like an orangey brown streak. And to me, they look like clouds. Now, my original one that I did of this, I actually gave to a friend for her birthday. And so I don't have it to show you guys, but it had a lot more of these that went down even into here. And I didn't realize until looking at the photo I took later, I was like, wow, that actually looks a lot like natural, those thin clouds that you sometimes get in the atmosphere. So there, I think the background is pretty good. Now you can go back and you can, if you felt like, oh, this is too vivid, I really want to dull down that blue, you can add more orange to your blue and make it not quite as brown as that, but you can make it more of a muted blue. Or you can go back and hit it up with some more, another coat of this yellow to orange. I could add a bit more bright yellow down here. I'm going to do that experimental wise right now. Got to get this sludge off my brush. Sludgy color. That's what color my water is. You can see in there it's turned kind of greenish brownish. Okay, so I'm going to take just a little yellow. Very small amount. And I'll start way down here in the corner. This is just for fun if you want to brighten things up. Just be careful around this natural wood down here, because that will be a lot harder to touch up. You have to use a little sandpaper probably. Speaking of sandpaper, if you do have anything with this that you feel like, I don't really like the way that turned out, you're not stuck with it. You could use sandpaper and sand a lot of the color off and just start again. So I'm going to actually switch to my second largest brush, which is the number 8 in this set. Take a little yellow on that. And this is where I could, in this orange area, I could put some streaks of that yellow, like we did earlier that we kind of covered up. Just blend them out really good so that they're soft. And these could totally be little broken up clouds. I'm primarily going to stick with this orange area because what will happen up in the blue, if I add, in fact, I'll do it right here because I'm going to put the moon there, but I'll show you. It turns greenish, and it's not the prettiest color for a sky. But you can come up into this funky transition color where the blue and orange meet. Put a few broken up clouds. I do have like where it looks like 3 lines and not super natural, so I'm going to add some over here that's going off the edge of the board. Okay. Yeah, I think that works pretty good. Let's see how dry that is. It's drying, but it's still a little wet. I think now is probably a good time to get a base coat of white on the mountain. We will likely do 2 coats. That first one might not be totally opaque, so that's what we want to do. 2 coats. Clean your brush off really good. If you need to change out your water, you can. I think I end up getting a lot of the colorful water out of my brush by just taking my paper towel. I wash my brush good and then I squeeze all the water out, and that helps get any excess paint pigment out too. All right. Okay, so let's take white. No need to mix any water with it. And we want to go along these 3 angled lines on each side. Might as well just start down here because this can dry some more. And obviously you want to be careful around these edges. I almost always get a little paint into this part, but most of the time it's such a small amount I can leave it. But again, you can always use a tiny bit of fine sandpaper and try it a little at a time because you don't want to change the color too much. This is somebody's old barn or fence. It is reclaimed wood, which I think is the coolest thing. This pine, though, that is probably right from Home Depot or something. We need the nice, smooth wood for that. I have painted on this before, and it's frustrating. It's definitely not meant for doing any kind of detail because of the texture of it. So yeah, if you like abstract type of painting, that would be pretty cool to use. Now, if you need to use a smaller brush to get around some of the small areas, you can switch down to like either the number 8 or the number 4. And this will help me get right up to the edge. Now, if you've never worked with acrylic paint before, it is tricky when you try to put a second coat of paint on before it's dry enough. Yeah, I got a little in my sky, so I'm just using my finger and wipe that off. This is probably where I should be using this little guy. I'm running out of white. Let me grab some more real quick. You guys just keep filling that in. Ugh. You're trying to get it out of the bottle. There we go. So when I'm first getting the paint on, I just, you probably notice I'm doing funky brush strokes here, just all different directions. That's fine. Just get the paint on there. And then while it's still wet, you can manipulate. Like I like to brush at the angle of the wood. I'm going to cover the big area, and then I'll switch to my littler brush just to get around some of these edges because I can be kind of sloppy sometimes. Now I'm going to switch to this guy. Use that thin edge of the brush. It'll work to your advantage. That's part of the reason I love this brush pack, because using the chiseled end here, you can get into these small corners, and it also works well for other things that we do, like background trees. If you've ever done those with us, you can create a forest by using the thin edge of the brush and brushing vertically, we do that in tons of our videos. It's a great way to paint background woods without having to sit there and painstakingly paint individual pine or fir trees. I actually have a live painting event with this one tonight, and I thought I'd just record myself doing it because it is important for me. I have not painted this in well over a year, and so I like to refresh my brain with how I'm going to teach it by painting through it first. So I thought I'm going to record myself, and I have these wood boards available, so we'll just add another kit to our website. So I thought that's what I do today. But yeah, this will be a fun class. There's only about 11 people. We keep it pretty small. And it's at a winery I have a membership to. That's just 5 minutes from my house. We teach there maybe twice a year. We don't do many live events anymore because Gogh keeps us pretty busy, and then my husband, who runs Gogh with me, Paul, he also has another business, which takes up his 40 hours a week. So, yeah, the live classes have just kind of gone by the wayside and are reserved for special times and special places. Okay, so yeah, that's the base coat. It definitely needs a second coat unless you want to see some of this wood grain coming through. You absolutely can leave it like that. I did not paint around these edges because I didn't need that kind of stress in my life. It's not even really noticeable because the wood is so light anyways. This needs to dry though before I would attempt to put a second coat on it. And I am going to do a second coat on mine because I can see where the blue kind of overlapped up there. Actually, that would be okay to leave too because it could look like a glacier. All right. Cool. Okay. So while that dries, let's talk about painting the moon. So when you look at the moon, you see dark spots and light spots. The dark spots are like the craters and impact zones on the moon. And there's a big splotch, I believe it's on the right side I think that's called the Sea of Tranquility. I've talked about it in other videos. I love the moon. I could just sit there and stare at it till I was blind. I think it's just the coolest thing. And it seems like you always notice different things. And some nights, depending on the atmosphere, it's a different color. Sometimes it's much different size. We had the most beautiful, be a waxing gibbous last night. Full moon on Sunday. So yeah, it's getting up there. It's nice and big. So I'm just killing time for a second, which is why I'm talking so much because I want this white to dry a little bit more before I lay my coaster down over it. Just not because I'm worried about the coaster, but if you like lift it at all and move it and bump it and place it down somewhere else, you'll get funky white streaks in the background. So anyway, back to the moon. What I do, I'm going to trace the coaster, unless you want a smaller, like you could even trace one of your little paint bottles or take the lid off and trace it. Just make sure maybe trace the reverse side of the lid. If you want a smaller moon, you can leave the moon off altogether. Obviously, in a sunset like this, that's so vivid, you probably wouldn't have such a giant bright moon right here. But this whole thing, it has obviously unnatural, it's natural and unnatural together. It's slightly abstracted. So you can do whatever you want. If you want to paint the Death Star in the sky, why not? I'm not going to stop you. All right, I'm going to wash my big brush off and set it aside because I just noticed it's hanging out with paint on it. We will put stars in the sky, but I have found it's better for me to have us paint the moon first, or at least get the shape out of the way, because otherwise you're going to put stars all over right where the moon goes, and then that can be a little bit of a problem because sometimes they can show through the moon. And let's go ahead now. Let's do it. So you can have, I have the moon on this one, the original painting, which is at my friend's house. Should run over and grab it real quick. It's showing halfway, but you can have, actually it's a little more than halfway. It's about 2/3. You can have that. You could have a full moon right here if you want. So it all just depends on where you lay your coaster down. I like to do a pretty big moon, so I'm going to do about 2/3 of it showing. And we want to pick up our smallest brush. Go ahead and dip it in water. And then place a little dot of water somewhere on your palette. I know the water's kind of greenish brownish. That's okay. Stir a little white into that so we have a nice fluid mix. And the reason I want this fluid, I don't want it super watery, just about the consistency of like heavy cream. So a little thicker than like water. Because tracing is a lot easier if you have a more fluid paint. You're not going to have to stop and redip your brush as much. But when I mix up paint like this, I end up with a lot on the brush that kind of crams down up in here in the metal ferrule area. It's ferrule. So I'm going to dab that off. This brush is ferrule. I'm going to hold this down really tightly and just do a light trace right along the edge. And your brush is probably going to run out of paint, but you still should be able to see at least a ghost outline of where your moon is, which I can see right now. Cool. I'll wash that brush off. Okay, let's see how dry. Let's see how it's nice and dry. So I've got my ghost outline, and I'm going to use my number 8 brush in white, just not the watered down white, just regular white. I'm going to push this out of the way so I don't drag my sleeve in it too much. And I like to use the thin edge of the brush and go along the edges first and pull inward. So I'll go across, pull inward. Let your brush run out of paint. And as you get down in here, just kind of smudge that paint down. And what you can notice that this is doing is it's leaving these dark patches. So that's our goal. We're going to go across, pull down, work that brush till the paint runs out. Seems to allow me to do about 3/4 of an inch, ½ inch before it starts running out. And you can turn your board. Sometimes I find it's easier to just always be at a certain angle where I can just pull towards myself. So I turn my work all over the place. A lot of times I'll turn it upside down. That looks kind of cool already. We're not going to leave it that way, don't worry. Okay, looking good. Got a little seam here. Yeah, so tonight when I teach this, my students are going to be painting flat on the desk like this. And the reason I'm doing that and no easels for them is because when you're working with really watered down paint like we did in the very beginning, if your project is vertical, this is something to keep in mind too. If your project is vertical, a lot of times you will fight with drips trying to come down the mountain, which might be what Bob Ross would call a happy little accident, because you might get this kind of cool, like rain looking thing here. But if you want it to look the way it looks without the streaks, you'll want to probably paint flat on a table. But me, because I'm going to be standing up and teaching, I have to paint mine on an easel. So I'll have a little extra challenge. Okay. So those spots where the paint got thin as the brush ran out, that's where you get those dark patches, which is cool. I might come back in and add some more brightness. You will find that as the paint dries, it becomes more transparent. Now I'm going to work along here. Pulling towards the center. Letting your brush run out of paint. And now you can go through and you can add little bits of paint, blending them outward. And I like to, so the center part of the moon is fairly bright and white, and it's really along the sides that you see those dark patches that are the craters. I don't want to leave just sky color behind though. I could, but I like to just use very little paint on the brush and kind of scrub it inwards so you have a little tiny bit of white paint there. And I am going to show you how to add some of these craters back in. Because right here we've got orange, and it's okay to have a little orange in there, but we do want some of the darker patches over here where the Sea of Tranquility is. I hope that's right. I hope that's what that's called right there. I know there is one on the moon that's called the Sea of Tranquility. So I'm just going to assume that it's that big one. That big patchy area on the right side of the moon. Nice along here, you don't have to worry about overlapping into your mountain because it's already white. So just overlap away. So yeah, I'm just going through and adding brighter patches of white. And add a bit more white through here and show you what I'll do next, because my moon is very opaque and I need some more dark patches on it. So I've got a face on the moon right now, 2 eyes. We can make a mouth, make Jack Skellington. We can completely convert this painting into a different kind of painting. Let's wash the brush. This next thing we do might hurt your brain a little bit. Just try to go with it. Go with the flow. So this color that we made, it was probably about 2 parts orange, 1 part blue to get that kind of brownish. We're going to do that. Let's scrape off some orange. So whatever orange you add, just add half the amount of blue. We are making sludge. It can be you can add a little more blue to it to richen it up just a bit, but we want it to be different than this color. So I've got a bit of paint on the brush from mixing. I don't want to start with too much, so I'm going to wipe it off. You can wipe it off on your palette or your paper towel, either way. Then a lot of times I'll redip the tip of the bristles just to pick up some fresh paint. And what I'm going to do, this is the part I said it's going to bother you maybe a little bit. I'm just making splotches of this color. And the moon on here is still a little bit wet. And that's actually totally fine. So this is my big canyon area. We're not going to leave it like this. We're going to glaze over it with white later so that it's not so harsh. And you can have some spots that are a little more opaque, so a little darker. Make sure down here, though, that you carry it down so that you're not just like stopping right before you reach this edge. And then I'm going to put some up in here. Splotchy areas. Just really utilize the flat side of this brush and just kind of mash it down. So I'm not poking straight down and splaying out my bristles. I'm using this flat side. And maybe I'll make a few random little craters off on the edges, or maybe in here. Because this is all going to be much softer when we glaze over it with white. Right now it is really, really dark, which can bother you because it's commanding all the attention from everything else. We don't want that, but it's going to stay like that for a few minutes, so I apologize. It has to dry. So just don't look at it. Just avoid looking at it. Pretend it's not there. Okay, so now is a great time to add a second coat of white here. Now you don't have to, go through and carefully add a second coat everywhere, unless you add a second coat in some spots and then it really is noticeable that you didn't hit others. But basically what I'm saying is you don't have to be as careful here. I mean, you want to be careful. You don't want to get paint down here, but you don't have to painstakingly get each little triangular area. Primarily, we want to get those areas where you can see background paint showing through. I love the design of these. I like the graphic elements. So this really, obviously we know mountains are not shaped like that. They are basically triangles, but they're, wobbly and bumpy and natural. But I happen to love the look, it's like let's say one of my art teachers used to love to use the word juxtaposition, fancy word. It's the juxtaposition of having a more natural landscapey background with this super angular graphic element here. Just happens to work together nicely. I'll tell you, the first time I bought one of these, I had the plan in my head of what I wanted to do, but I was a little nervous about how it would actually turn out. That one is on our website. It is called Rustic Mountain Moon, and it is pink and blue and white and just so pretty. The moon, I think the moon on that one is over here, and I think we have pine trees. Yeah, we do. We have like fir trees on it. You can have a whole collection of these. They do make nice gifts. My friend Leslie, she was having her birthday, and I honestly did not know what to get her at all. And so I thought, you know what? I know I can paint one of these, and I know it will turn out pretty good. And she loved it. And then we did one for our in-laws. They bought a home that's has a really rustic fireplace. And we got one that has 3 mountains on it. And my husband Paul painted it, and it was so pretty. They have it hanging on their mantle. Okay, I'm going to turn this because I switched to my littler brush because I really want to get up in here without too much trouble. There, I got it. So I don't think I'll need another coat of white on here. We'll see when it dries. The paint does tend to dry a little more transparent. It's kind of a funny thing. I see a little chip here I want to try to paint. Uh-oh, my OCD is showing. Okay, I'm going to wash this brush. This is still drying. Don't look at it. Don't let it bother you. Let's paint some stars. I love to load my sky up with lots of stars, especially in the dark area. So if you observe out in the sunset when it's starting to turn night and it's really dark up here and lighter down here, obviously you won't see as many stars down in here, but you can load them up in here. Now, one thing, if you are going to do that, like what I just talked about, a lot of times when I tell the students to do that, they'll just put like a stripe of stars across the top. Now, that doesn't look quite right. You do want to bring 1 or 2 speckly stars down in here. You just don't want to load it up as much as you do up here. The best and easiest way to do stars, those of you who painted with us for a while know, you find your smallest brush you have, and this particular set goes down to a nice sharp point, which is perfect for stars. So I just dip it in the white paint, and then I didn't pick up a lot. I like to start with a little because otherwise you'll end up with a supernova. And I'll just dot it on here, and I keep dotting until my brush runs out of paint. Sometimes I'll be lazy and just feed the wet paint off of a wet star, so I don't have to go all the way back to my palette, because that's too much. So what you want to do here is avoid doing a pattern where every single star is 1/2 inch apart. We all do it. Even those of us who've been painting for years and years and years, it is a human tendency to find patterns and things, or to make patterns and things. I want to be more erratic. And so I'm going to go through and cluster some stars together. And then I'll move along and cluster more stars together. So that way you're not ending up with polka dots. We don't want polka dots. Certain paintings we can do polka dots, not this one. And the cool thing about using the handle of your brush is as it runs out of paint, your stars get smaller and smaller. So it's actually doing that random work for you. Now, before I go too far, I'm going to show you a cool effect which is totally optional. It can be hard to do. So I would say practice a lot before you do this. So I'll do some fresh paint stars. Take a smaller one that's still wet. Use your finger and just lightly, very, very lightly. I'm barely putting any pressure on. Okay, that didn't show up. Fail. Let's try a little more paint. Smudge it around into a little, till your finger runs out of paint. You're making concentric circles and getting larger and larger as your finger runs out of paint. So you end up with this smudgy orb. And then I'll go back and I'll just stamp a little bright star right in the middle. Now, this can get out of hand and you can end up with oval swirls, or you can end up with just gigantic hazy orbs. So I recommend trying this out maybe on the back of this before you attempt to do it here. But if you find that you love it and you're good at it, just feel free to do as many as you want. Just make sure you poke that little star back in the middle. So then you just have these nice glowing areas. I'm not going to do too many of those because I'm not sure if I'm going to teach it that way tonight, because in-person classes, it can be a challenge, because here I'm pretty zoomed in and you can really see what I'm doing up close. But when you're in a room with, 12 people, some of them are pretty far in the back and can't really get the full effect of how small these need to be. Okay, so I've got a lot of stars up in here. I do see some where I've kind of done a pattern, so I'm going to break that up. I don't know. This is funny, this area where the texture of the wood is slightly different. There's like a knot hole and then this rougher texture here. So I'm thinking, gosh, it could almost be like a galaxy or something. Okay. Now I'm going to bring some stars down in here. Not too many. You might dot your brush off on your palette a couple times first, so you end up with real tiny ones down in here. Oh, I've got a fuzz stuck to mine. I was wondering, why does that star have a tail? But you do definitely want to put some down in the orangey area. Just not as many as up here. This is fun to do. Sometimes you have to force yourself to stop. Just going back and adding a few brighter stars where I want them to be. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Pretty good. I'm going to wipe off the handle of the brush. Make sure you do that. It's really easy to forget. And then what happens is you get a buildup of acrylic dried paint here. And then every time you go to do stars again, you've got blobbier and blobbier and bigger stars. And yeah, it can be really frustrating. You can pick it off if it's dried, but it'll break your fingernails sometimes. Okay, enough of that. Let's wash the brush. Dry it off. I'm using my biggest brush now to do some glazing. You can use, let's start with the biggest brush, but you can use this number 8 brush too, if you're not sure. And you want to start off carefully. So I'm going to just pick up a very small amount of white. See how much I have? Very, very small. Not a glob. And I'm going to start on the edges and just glaze over. So look at the difference here. I'll just do this part on the left of the moon here. You can still see my dark areas, but they are much more subdued than this side. And I can keep doing this. I can keep adding more white until I like it. And you can have some areas that have more glaze, like maybe a second coat of glaze, and then others that just have one coat. Because if you do look at the moon, you'll see some of the darker areas are darker than other darker areas. Because it just likes to do that to us. Deeper craters, I guess. And I'm just letting my brush run out of paint so I can control the amount of glaze that I put on there. These, I think I want to subdue a little. And then I'll switch to, let me just toss that in the water. I'll switch to my number 8 brush, and then I can go in and make some brighter areas. Even like some of these areas that you left white, you can add some brighter paint to those areas so that you have more of a contrast, but without it being like super dark like it was before. Just blend that outward. Start with the paint on there and blend it outward. Let your paintbrush run out of paint as you work outward. Took me a long time to figure out how to paint the moon and have it look somewhat right. And then an even longer time for me to figure out how to teach it that way. But I feel like in the last years, I've really gotten it down to where people's moons are turning out really good. I'm sorry if you just heard my dryer go off. I'm washing paint aprons. Yeah, I like that. Now there's an option I'm going to show you later. And it's just one of the last things that we do with the moon. You can leave it as it is. And just, there's that dryer. It is the most obnoxious buzz. My dog hates it. Let me throw my brush around. You can leave your moon as it is. Or you can do what I'll show you later. I do notice on mine, real quick, as I was throwing my brush around, I noticed down in here, it needs to be just a tiny bit sharper. I felt like it needed another coat of white just down in there. Okay, now we are up to the scariest part of the painting. Ooh, trees. You can do it as long as you keep your paint water down a bit, and you keep your brush strokes with very light pressure. So you're not going to push hard with your brush. The harder you push, the thicker your lines will be. And for trees, we want nice thin branches, at least for the trees we're going to put on this. So let's go ahead and talk about that. So I want kind of a brownish color. And out of all the colors on your palette, the colors you can mix together to make brown are black and orange. You can even add a little yellow in there, play around with it. I'm going to mix the paint with my number 8 brush. I'm going to move this guy aside for a minute. And I'll scrape up a little black. Just plop it down right here. Scrape up a little orange. Mix it in. So I've got off black now, kind of dark brownish. I want it to be kind of I guess a chestnut brown. You can play around with it. What happens if I add a little yellow? It didn't alter it that much. It does make it more of a brown. Less black, more brown. And now I want to add a drop of water. So I just dipped my brush in the water, added the drop of water. I will probably have to remake this because I never make quite enough paint. But I'm going to wash the brush and set it aside because we're going to paint our trees with our smallest brush. And so what we want to do here is we want our trees to be varying in height. And they don't necessarily make sense to the painting. It's one of those things where I talked about where we've got this big graphical element and then we've got these trees over here on this side. I know I'm kind of off camera, popping up here. And obviously the size of the trees in relationship to the size of the mountain is off, but it works. It is kind of a designy element that works really good. So let's do it. So I'm going to show you on my palette how to paint these trees. So let's say this is our big triangular mountain. We've got the moon over here. So way down in here, here I'll draw the rest of the board so it makes sense. Really scrappy drawing here. So I have the trees that start way down here and they go up. I usually will do the tree trunks first so I can make the height how I want. And then I'm going to add branches. So I go up and out and I add a lot of them. These are a deciduous tree. You can do fir trees if you want. If you really like the idea of that, I'll show you how to do those. Sorry, these are so small. And you can even go off the side of the board with your branches. It would look good to do that so that everything's not just locked into that square area. You can put branches that go up and out. Now, all of these branches really grow upward. So you're not really going to have any that grow. Sometimes trees, like when we've done deciduous trees in the studio, I like to start them with a Y shape. But sometimes the branches go outward like this. And yeah, you branch off of those and you make more going out, like more like a fruit tree. But we don't want to do that with these. These are going to be more like maybe a birch. Maybe alder kind of grow like that too. So they're really upright. We don't want these going out in this broccoli shape. Thinking here, you can add leaves if you want, like little dots here and there. But that's not necessary. It's meant to be fall in this painting. Fir trees, that's what I was going to show you. So let me grab a piece of paper. I'm running out of room. So for fir trees, let's say this is the side of our mountain, moon. You would do straightish. They can lean a little. I try to just parallel the side of the board. And then at the top, I'll do a couple little dots. Like if you think about a Christmas tree, if you bring one in your house, it's got that one spike that goes upward, which is usually crooked. And that's where you'd put your Christmas star on the top of your tree or whatever. So I try to think about that. Okay, yeah, that's going to do that. So it looks like a little stalk of weed or something at first. And then there's little short ones on either side. And then you can just keep adding dots of tree boughs, like almost like you're doing mustaches. So I'm just dabbing and lifting. And they'll overlap each other, and they do that in nature. You don't want to make them have too much room in between, or it doesn't look quite right. I like to leave trunk at the bottom. I really like the look of like Doug fir trees. But if you're doing fir trees and you want to bring the foliage all the way to the bottom, you can. So that would be the way it looks with fir trees. The last one I did of this, the pink and blue and white one, had fir trees. So I thought I was going to do something different. Something maybe with a little more East Coast look. Out here in Oregon, we have an abundance of fir trees. I just want to make sure this is straight on camera. There we go. It's crooked for me, but hopefully straight for you guys. Okay, so scary. Now you want to refresh your paint with a little water. And you want to keep your touch really light. Don't push hard at all. Make sure you don't have too much paint on your brush. One of the things I like to do is just pull and twist on the palette and then redip the tip of the bristles in the fresh paint. Let's start with the little itty bitty guy right here. So you've got this seam, which will cause you a little trouble, not too much. My brush is starting to run out of paint as I go up. Now tree trunks, they're always thicker where they grow out of the ground. So it will be nice and thin and narrow at the top, but a little bit thicker down here. And I could go through, if it's easier for you to go through and draw all your tree trunks first, you can do that. But I'm just going to do 2, and then I'll show you how to branch them out. This one is going to go up here. So I don't want to box it into this space. We do want a few that will flirt with the blue. Just giving a second coat, widening up the base of this tree trunk. They're pretty, I make mine pretty narrow for this particular painting. Don't want the trees to be too stout. We'll save that for other paintings. This one too, I can give it a little coat. One thing that's helpful is if you practice, you can lift your brush pressure as you get to the top. And even as you do branches, lift that brush pressure as you go out to the end. And that's going to make the branches nice and pointy at the ends. Okay, I'll just do branches on this one for now. So right about, I don't know, maybe halfway up. I'm going to make a branch that goes up and see how close it is to the trunk. It's not like going way out like I did on the paper over here. And once I get that done, I'm going to trace it and then I just branch off, lifting that pressure. And same thing here. I'm going to branch off of that. And you can keep adding more and more. So this is the area where you might have a mistake happen. Oops, I'm going a little too far outward. That's all right. It didn't end up going out too bad. So if you do a branch and immediately you don't like it, you can try to tear off a little corner of your paper towel or twist up your paint rag and wipe it off while it's still wet. And if that doesn't work, you can dampen your paper towel and try wiping it off that way. And if that doesn't work, you might just have to cover it with another branch or some leafy foliage. I'm going to refresh my paint with a little water. It just evaporates so fast. Trees are something that take a lot of practice. Out of all of the things I painted in landscapes, I think trees are probably the one thing that I've maybe practiced the most. And it's just really looking at trees in your surrounding environment and see how they grow. Like, are the branches long? Are they short? Usually you have a bit of both. You'll have some broken off branches, maybe like that. These branches are going to crisscross a little bit. Are the branches wavy or curly? Well, it depends on the variety of tree. Here's curly maple trees, all kinds of fun, different types of trees. But start looking around you. And like I said earlier, you will naturally start doing that as you paint more. Like, oh, how would this work in a painting? I get it now. And practice. Use paper. Like you can see, I was painting on a little piece of paper. That way you don't have to waste a canvas. Just practice away. And just know that you will end up with funky branches. Like I've got one right here where it ended up kind of thick up there, and it's pulling my attention to it right now. And it's giving me OCD troubles. But I'm going to show you guys how to paint some leafy foliage to cover up any funky little spots. I think I'm going to do one more tree. Now I could keep going. I could do a whole series, but I think I'm going to do just one more. Maybe I'll bend this one a little. Make the trunk a little wavy. And every time I add a branch, I'm feather light pressure, like the lightest you can manage. Barely touch your brush to it. I like to make my branches kind of long because what can happen, I've seen this so many times in classes where you get every single branch is the same length, and it's just not knowing how to paint them quite yet. And so the students will be done. I'll be like, what is wrong with my trees? Why do they look weird? And it's because every single branch is the same length. And so you end up with what look like deer antlers from a cartoon drawing. And the way you fix that is, and I've done it for the students, I've come through and I've been, let me take your brush. And I'll show them how to extend branches and add to them. And it's just a little magical transformation. Easy to fix. Okay, almost done with this part. That's a lot of water on my brush. I could sense it wanting to drip down. In fact, it did a little bit, left a little splotch. Oh, I hear a dog poking its head in. You're making the door squeak. They're always curious about what I'm doing in here. Sounds creepy. Hi, Hachi. I have 2 Shiba Inus, and they are so funny. They sleep all day and have massive energy at night. So that's probably my fault. Okay, so I've got my 3 trees. I actually really love the look of this. If you want, I'm going to fix up a branch here. One that had the water splotch. If you want to add some foliage, I'm going to show you how to do that. It's best done in just little stippling dots. Keep them kind of small. Now you can use this same color. I'll do some up here where I had that yucky part. So here's what I'm doing. Let me show you it up close. Let's say this is the end of a branch. I'm doing a little cluster and floating some in the background that are not attached to anything. Because what you don't see when you're looking at a tree, you don't see all the tiny little twigs and branches that are supporting these little itty bitty leaves. And in the painting, it actually looks really cool to float them that way. Cluster them around the branch, but float some off. And you know, sometimes it can look like the wind is disrupting the leaves and they're getting ready to hop off. In fact, you can even do, if you feel like it, you could do some in the background around the trees that are falling off. They are really starting to fall off. Today is October 7th, and they are really starting to fall off in the neighborhood. We walk our dogs every night, and it's fun to take note of that. Be like, oh, wow, there's a lot more leaves on the ground today than there were 2 days ago. And then we have a variety of tree along a main street just outside my house that, gosh, they're like light bulbs. They almost hurt your eyes. I need to find out what variety they are. They're gorgeous. And people take their senior photos along this road, wedding photos, all kinds of stuff. During this time of year, there's tons of photographers who come out because of those beautiful trees. Okay, so I've gone a little crazy with the leaves. This is great if you have branches to fix. Just clog them up with some leaves. Nobody ever has to know about it. Okay, so I could be done with this painting, but if you wanted to, I was going to show you something about the moon. You could add a little yellow to your moon if you wanted it to look more like a harvest moon. You could even add a little yellow mixed with the orange so you get that kind of sunny delight color that I talked about earlier. Let's see what that would look like. I want to do yellow. Just be careful of these areas where you might have contaminated the paint. Yellow, a little orange. I love harvest moons. I think they're the coolest looking thing. And let's see how that goes over so that's pretty bright. It's probably too bright. I'll wipe that off with my finger. Now, so what I want to do is I want to mix some water with it. Ew, my water is murky. And then I'm going to add a little white to it. So you get this kind of color. Let's see what that looks like if it's a little more orange. I don't want it to be peach. I'm going to water that down just a bit more so it's more of a glaze. We have more yellow to it. And then wipe your brush off. And then try glazing over your moon with that light color. The thin light color. You can glaze over the dark spots or leave them. But that's what it would look like. In fact, let me grab my bigger brush. I think I can do this more efficiently. Here's my color. More orange. So it's pretty watered down so that it is a glaze. See how quick I can go. There. So that is pretty neat. And that's how I did my friends. This one maybe is a little more vivid than hers ended up being. But I think it balances out really nicely. The cool thing too, you could take your paper towel and you could blot up some of these areas just so that it's even more subtle. But yeah, that is it. That's the painting. You can sign it like on the back if you want. You can paint the edges. So the edges of these are a little more rough cut. So if you have a little fine grit sandpaper, you can just run that over real quick and dust it off and then paint the edges. Or you can paint it without doing that. It's just a little more work because that paint really wants to grab into the wood. But that is all. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I did. I see I've got a little white down here. A little sandpaper will take care of that. I think it turned out really pretty. I hope you guys love yours. And again, we are GoBox Art Crate, gobox.com. Check us out. We do a lot of holiday theme paintings and kids paintings and all kinds of crafty things we can think of. And it's a lot of fun. So I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of October. We are doing some Halloween paintings from our October crate starting next Friday, the 14th, and Saturday, the 15th. So we'll do 2 live videos those days. And we'll see you guys then. Bye. Thank you.